Uh, Thank you so much, Suvani. And I think I'll start by thanking Suvani for inviting me to GMI for this talk. And thank you all for being here on this very cold Delhi winter morning. And
Rainy also today, super
my
rainy.
God, it's been raining all night.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping कि light na chali jaye mere ghar pe at the, like the moment of the beginning of the talk. And I think some more students you're expecting, Suvani, or can I start?
Yeah, couple of more, but it's okay. You begin.
Okay, cool. So, one second. Okay, so the title of my talk today is music capable of politics? Some remarks on the relation between theater and music in India. And we've been planning this for some time now, and this topic is something that has been of much interest to me. And but yet I've been a bit apprehensive to talk about it because this is not my primary area of research. So I'm starting with this disclaimer. But preparing for today's session has given me the opportunity to think through a lot of questions from a very different lens. And I shall take you through a very selective story of Indian theatre and its relationship with music. And I say selective because what I will talk about shortly is it's not a survey or an exhaustive history of Indian theatre from any perspective. It's far from that. But what I shall look at are some particular instances from this history to understand the relationship between music and theatre. And then to pose a very basic yet fundamental question that if music is something that is used in theatre, so if music is a resource for theatre or a part of theatre, in the sense that we use music in theater to enhance or create a certain effect, then are we always to understand music in relation to something else? So, what is the capacity of music in itself? Does music have an essence? So, these are some very, very basic questions that I hope that this story of theater and music will take us towards. So I'll start this session with a very brief introduction to modern Indian theatre. I hope I'm audible and
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I'll start with this with a very brief introduction to modern Indian theatre. And so when we think of Indian theatre in general, we encounter a very diverse and rich field of performance that is defined by a plurality of forms, representational conventions, languages, content, and locations. So there are so many different kinds of theatrical traditions that we see in different geographical locations of India. So you have, proscenium theater, you have street theater, you have dance forms, you have dance drama forms. But when we talk about modern Indian theater or modern Indian drama, we essentially mean proscenium theater that developed in the post-independence period, that is post 1947. And to locate the historical origin of this form, we see that it emerged under European influence in colonial cities like Bombay and Calcutta in the second half of the 19th century. So post 1850s. But all Indian performative forms, theater, dance, and music, they have a very complicated relationship with colonial modernity. And I say complicated because, uh, to put it very simply, towards the end of the British rule, as India is consolidating itself into a nation state, and I'm sure all of you must have, come across this in your history classes in school, or somewhere you must have read about this, that um, towards the end of British rule, as India is consolidating itself into a nation state, a major question that came up was, how do we define this Indianness? So, what is it to be Indian? And in the context of our art forms, the question was that what is Indian theater or Indian dance, or what constitutes Indian music? And then we have a whole process of organizing and systematizing these art forms retrospectively. So it is from the location of the 20th century, that is after independence, that we are looking into the past to speculate which forms can be categorized as classical, which forms can be called semi-classical, folk. And so this is a movement that's happening in music. But classicization and systematization, to create a system out of a practice which is generally seen in disarray. There's so much theater, there's so much music, लेकिन उसका हमें एक system बनाना है, a system of Indian music, a system of Indian theater. So this process of classicization, it is a process that is taking place parallelly in the development of all our performing arts within the context of a new emerging independent nation. So within Indian theater history, then, there is immense debate and contestation as to what is indigenous and what is alien. So by indigenous, what are the Indian elements that are present in our theater, and what are the alien, as in what are the European elements? So what is classical or traditional and what is modern? Or there is a debate between what is rural, provincial versus urban, metropolitan. So these binaries lie at the base of the development of Indian theater. And this is because there are different ways in which practitioners have responded to the colonial experience. So one ideological tendency has been to disclaim colonial practices, to reject the colonial experience entirely, and seek the revival of pre-colonial traditions of performance as our national theatrical forms. So in theater, we see that several practitioners would privilege the classical Sanskrit tradition in theater, or texts like the Natya Shastra, as the source of aesthetic and cultural continuities that contain the present. And this has also happened in music. If any of you, actually, we all encounter this in our, in our normal conversations on music, that we often hear that the root of Indian classical music lies in the Samved. And, so thereby giving the musical genre a very specific cultural and religious identity. So these are all connections that are being made. So what I'm trying to highlight is that these are not ever present connections. These connections are being made at a particular, historical juncture, which is the historical juncture of modernity. And in a post-independent country, we are now looking at what form should we give our music, and what form should we give our theater and dance to our performative traditions. And then such connections are being made from the point of view of the present back into an ancient past, in order to derive some kind of an authenticity and legitimacy for the present practice. So if I were to explain this very simply, that if I tell you today that I'm a musician, and if I say that, I am a musician from the Gwalior Gharana. So as soon as I say Gwalior Gharana, it kind of, it adds a certain, what do you say, like a traditional value, or what do you say, a legitimacy to my being a musician. So so what I'm saying is that this was not, so the Gharana is also not, has not always been ever present. The Gharana as a system also comes up in the late 19th, 20th century, where musicians feel that they need some kind of an ancient legitimacy, or an idea of authenticity to legitimize their practice. So and we see a similar kind of a tendency in theater also, where people are saying कि अगर हमारा Indian theater है तो वो कहाँ से आ रहा है? So we are saying that it is coming from Sanskrit theater, even though we know that there is something, that there is a colonial experience which has really affected the way we look at theater and how we formulate theater. So this is one tendency to construct a national identity by overlooking the colonial period, and we are making a bridge back into the past to say कि हमारा जो हमारा past है वो एक colonial past नहीं है, colonial past के पहले वाला past है, which is a pre-colonial reality. So that is one tendency. And the second tendency has been to advocate a reinvigorated and syncretic modern form of theater, which is indigenous and at the same time internationalist and cosmopolitan. So something which absorbs European influences in terms of form, organization, and performance conventions into traditional modes of performance in different Indian languages. So here there is a certain kind of an acceptance of the colonial experience, and also an assertion of an indigenous experience through bringing in material or bringing in texts or modes of performance from indigenous performative traditions. So at the juncture of independence, there was already an upsurge and a very rich development in theatre. The Indian People's Theatre Association, which is called IPTA, it was a national level theatre movement that started in 1942-43, and it presented a serious critique of the imperialist and colonial enterprise and radically redefined theatre in relation to the people by mobilizing regional musical and theatrical forms. So the whole idea of IPTA was that our folk forms are political in themselves, and we will. So it is a rejection of the imperialist project. It is a rejection of the colonial, what do you say, the techniques and the colonial enterprise, and there is an assertion at the same time of the people. So folk actually comes, so there are two meanings of folk. When we say folk, we either imagine a community. तो अगर हम बोलेंगे राजस्थानी folk, तो हम राजस्थानी community को imagine करते हैं. Or we say Himachali folk, so we are imagining, or a Himachali community. So that is one idea of folk, which is where we look at folk as a community, as an identity. But there is another, the root of the word folk comes from a German word, which actually means folk, which is people. And so at the very root of folk lies an idea of the people. And when you say an idea of the people, you are basically opening up the field to not any particular community, or say a particular class or a particular caste, but you're opening up the field to people in general. There is an openness to the idea of folk. So in 1942-43, when IPTA emerges as a national level movement, it is mobilizing this very idea of the people through folk songs, through theatrical forms, and questioning the colonial enterprise through these indigenous forms. And then you have the Sangeet Natak Academy, which is set up in 1953. It is a body that will look into the preservation and promotion of Indian arts. And then in 1959, you have the National School of Drama as an institution for intensive training in Indian theatre. But what is happening here is that both these institutions, so in 1942, like I said, there's IPTA. 1953, about 9 or 10 years later, you have Sangeet Natak Academy. And then a few years later, you have National School of Drama in 1959. But these institutions, these government institutions, National School of Drama and Sangeet Natak Academy, they are somewhere trying to manage, consolidate, and organize the massive ground level upsurge and people's movement in theatre around this time, of which IPTA was a very important part. So in Sangeet Natak Academy and in the National School of Drama, the whole idea is to imagine and construct what is it that we could call Indian theatre. And music becomes a very essential part of this. So, so just to sum up this second tendency that I'm trying to highlight, from the side of the government, we see a huge investment in the arts. Theatre primarily was seen by practitioners and policymakers as an important art for remolding society and for promoting values that a new nation ought to embody. So theatre was seen as both a link to an ancient indigenous tradition, as well as a form of representation that could voice contemporary concerns of nationhood. So in this conception, Indian theatre is not a seamless extension of either colonial or pre-colonial traditions, but it is a product. It is a product of new theoretical, textual, institutional, and cultural conditions created by the experience of political independence, cultural autonomy, and new nationhood. So briefly, these are the two political tendencies central to the genesis of modern Indian theatre. So the idea of a national theatre depicts the nation as a homogeneous unity. So the tendency that I first highlighted, where you are somewhere trying to reject the colonial enterprise, and you're seeking a past which is a pre-colonial past. So there the idea is to present a certain kind of a homogeneous unity, that our nation has a seamless tradition. that our nation has a seamless musical tradition, it has a seamless theatrical tradition. So every specific cultural expression is absorbed into the larger national homogeneous narrative. And a very, very, apt example of this is Mile Sur Mera Tumhara, the song that became so popular. So in Mile Sur Mera Tumhara, you see that there is a representation of different, folk regions. And so you have different folk forms being sung. And yeah, so you have different folk forms being sung. And yet there is an imagination of a nation in the sentence that Mile Sur Mera Tumhara to Sur Bane Hamara. And after this, then there is another.
Nice, nice. I think it's a good idea. Great.
Sorry.
Sorry, I think someone was. Yeah.
Okay, can I continue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So after Mile Sur Mera Tumhara, there is another production which is Baje Sargam Har Taraf Se Goonj Bankar Des Raag. I don't know. I'm sure you must have heard all of these in the DD times. They're all part of our DD cultural heritage, and there you see the mobilization of the name of a rag, which is Des. कि बजे सरगम हर तरफ से गूंज बनकर देस राग. And Des Rag here is not just Des Rag, which is actually a folk melody coming from Rajasthan, but Des Rag here means the nation, the idea of a nation. So there is a conflation of, a musical entity onto a national entity in order to create some kind of a unity between the two. And so this is basically the point that every specific cultural expression, which is, so the whole idea of unity in diversity comes from here. So every cultural expression is then absorbed into a larger national homogeneous narrative. So it is tied up with the project of nation building, advocating a totalizing, homogeneous vision of national theatre. And a very significant director in this light is B.V. Karant, who he was part of NSD, and later he also became the director of NSD. So he used a lot of indigenous musical forms as a resource for material which was national and international. So he was primarily working in Hindi theatre, and he was working with Brecht's plays. So for a long time, around his work, there has been a debate whether he is politicizing music or whether politics becomes culturalized or musicalized in his plays. So whether he's trying to raise Brecht's universal political ideas through an organic musical tradition, or is he, kind of using music towards a political end? So this is a debate around his work, and unfortunately, I don't have a clip to show you how he's using music, but he draws from, in Bhopal, Bharat Bhavan, he works with this repertory called Rang Mandal, and so he's also looking at, folk forms from Madhya Pradesh, and he's also looking at, he was Kannada, so he was also looking at Kannada, music and theatrical forms, and he was bringing them into a space which is a national theater space. So matlab, his idea is to use these elements into a framework which is a framework of a national theater. So and on the other hand, so on the one hand, there is this homogeneous idea of the nation. On the other hand, we see a more critical idiom of questioning this nationalist paradigm, and particularly mobilizing an alternate idea of people in the work of directors such as Habib Tanveer, Safdar Hashmi, in the plays of Ipta, in the work of, Kanhai Lal is another theatre director, Ratan Thiam. These are all very significant names in theatre history. And I don't have the time to, go specifically into the work of each of them, but I will speak particularly of Habib Tanveer, who works with the Chhattisgarhi musical and theatrical forms, and somewhere to pose him opposite the work of B.V. Karant, which I mentioned. And there the whole idea is there is an appropriation of, these forms to present something on the national stage. But in Habib Tanveer, what we see is the idea here is not to meld into a nationalist theater, but to question that very paradigm. And before I speak on this, I will, I think, maybe show you a clip of this play directed by Habib Tanveer, which was called Charandas Chor. So Charandas Chor is a play which is full of contradictions. It is a play about Charandas, who's a thief, but he's a very conscientious thief. So so while he steals, he also he has certain principles. So he steals and he kind of distributes whatever he steals among people who are disadvantaged, and he questions the feudal lord, and he questions, so he's so you will notice all of these. So the dynamic in this play is very different from um, what you see in what I spoke about in the context of BV Karant. So I'll just play this clip. 1 second. Um, 48. This play is available on YouTube. So if any of you are interested, you can watch it later.
Can you also drop the link to this, Anubhuti?
Yeah, I'll do that. So I'm going to start at 31:48. So there's this poor peasant who goes to the feudal lord, and he's asking him to basically कि थोड़ा मुझे अनाज दे दो. And so obviously the feudal lord, he kind of the zamindar, basically he refuses to give him anything. So he goes to Charandas, and Charandas says कि हम उसका सारा अनाज चुरा लेंगे. So this is, now just see how this scene is presented over here. Can you hear?
Yeah.
गौच्या राम राम रा
राम राम. हाँ, ये तो मरमुड़ी में बैठ जा. तमाम गद्दी खराब करके रखती.
गलती हो गई मालिक, माफी दे दे दादा.
अरे गलती नहीं हो रे, तुम आदमी मतलब चिन्हो नहीं, कैसे आए रे?
मोर लड़का यार 3 दिन हो गए एक दाना नहीं खाया मालिक. तय मुझे 4 किलो चावल दे देते दाऊ.
वे तुम हर बाल बच्चा ठेकले बैठे हो रे.
ठेकत नहीं ले मालिक, फिर भगवान के दिए तो यह बहुत भरेगा.
अरे भगवान के दिए बहुत है, सबला बांटे बरनो है रे. अरे तेका बराड़ा था तोर हाथ गोर तो धल नहीं रे. ये तोर संगवारी रे.
हाँ,
तो मोरो पहलवान ले क्या है?
मैं गरीब आदमी कहाँ पहलवान नहीं होता दादा.
कौन रे?
मैं आदमी हूँ.
अरे वो तो महू देखा तो ते आदमी है. मैं तोर नाम और काम ल पूछा तो.
मत पूछ,
खबर
मैं सुन के सह नहीं सकता.
अति वजह है तोर बात है रे.
आओ.
अच्छा ले बताओ सुनबो.
तो फिर सुन, मोर नाम है चरंदास, मोर काम है चोरी.
यही है.
दोनों मिला के चरंदास चोर कैसे बोला?
चरंदाज चोरस मोर घरेलू उठा के ले जाबे.
हाँ, मौका पड़ी तो वैसने हो जाए. अरे गरीब मांगे थे ले दे दे.
हाँ, ते कहा था हम दे दे.
आओ, मैं कहा था का चिट्ठी दे दे. नहीं तोरे घर ले सब खा ले, चोरी करके सब गरीब मन में बांट दे.
ले ले हम दे. चोरी करके बाहर देगे.
दे दे मालिक, मैं सुने हवा ये सच बोलतेगा. जैसे कैसे उन्हें कर बताते दाऊ, नहीं दे तो सब उल्टा पुल्टा हो जाए मालिक.
वारे मोर धर्मदास के चमचा, दोनों मिलके मोर सब उलट पुलट कर दू रे.
हाँ, उलट पुलट कर दे. अरे गरीब मांगे थे दे दे.
और मैं कहा थे बेचार रे.
समझ जा दाऊ.
नहीं समझे तो चल दे.
क्या बोलिया, कमाना धमाना तो है.
I'll just go a bit forward. Is it coming from my?
I think someone is, let me check, someone's unmuted possibly. It's fine now.
Huh.
You can ask Abhishek. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just
Also,
done
yeah,
that.
yeah.
No problem, no problem.
दाना खाई रे?
नहीं खाए।
अरे दाना देखा फिर पीले में बीड़ी।
अच्छा नहीं ग्राउंड बना देगा।
राहुत मना थे।
हाँ।
अरे मोर हारमोनियम लगता रे।
अच्छा
अरे मोती न कहरे गारे गए समय बहुरा नहीं संगी को जन्म मिले मारे
आज ही लगे पहाड़ में भैया। अरे जगह चंदन के रूख रे हाफा मिर्गा उड़ भरे चारी ल बजुरा तू।
कृष्ण राज में दूध दही और राम राज्य में घी। कलयुग में पेप्सी तब पाइप लगा के पी। हलवा में हरी बसे और गाजर में घनश्याम, मक्खन में मोहन बसे तो रबड़ी में श्री राम।
अरे बड़ा हुआ तो क्या हुआ और जैसे पेड़ खजूर। अरे पंछी को छाया नहीं अब फल लागे।
ठाकुर जो है लाइन संगी, लाइन सुपारी बीच को रंग महल में बैठो मालिक राम। मजा आ गया खेलना। और वो राउंड पर के गद बताइए रे। कलयुग में पेप्सी खाइए पाइप लगा के पी। अरे क्या मालिक? अरे सब धान के बड़ा छलनी कर रहे सब कहाँ गए रे? अरे मैं पीकर सब रखे रहे होगा। अरे मैं तोड़ पाने देख रहा क्या होता हूँ नाचे भुला गए रे। चीटी कन नाची मालिक। अरे तोर चीटी कन में मोर का रंग फूट गए रे चीटी कन। अरे क्या तू लोग धर रहे? अरे क्या वाला दौड़ो रे दौड़ो रे दौड़ो रे।
सुनो संगवारी भाई मोटरंदा से छोड़ने बेटी सुनो संगवारी भाई मोटरंदा से छोड़ने बड़े बड़े पैसा वाला से पिसा उतारी कर राजा के ओ ये भी सुनो सुनो संगवारी भाई मोहतरम जोड़ में सबको भाई आदमी मंचोर नहीं दिखे जबरा पदवी पकड़ी वाला
वो सबको भयंती मंचोर नहीं दिखे जबरा पदवी पगड़ी वाला।
This was just to give you a glimpse of how this, how this theatrical form is kind of unravels in the play. And so you see that how by using a language which is using Chhattisgarhi language, and there are certain, what do you say, certain comments or jibes that they are making, at the dominant order. So that whole thing about कलयुग में पेप्सी, तो वो एक वो उस तरीके का कमेंट है. फिर एक कमेंट है कि वो कबीर का जो बड़ा हुआ तो क्या हुआ जैसे पेड़ खजूर. एंड इस पूरे इसमें ये जैसे हो रहा है कि that initially this person goes to ask. I hope you all understood what was happening in the scene. Is there anyone who would like to maybe just briefly explain it or something? As in intuitively, what did you think happened in this?
So the servant wanted to, like, he was asking his master for some, like, 4 kilos of rice, but the master didn't want to give it to him. And then there was this guy, I'm forgetting his name, the chor,
Charandas.
Charandas chor.
Yeah.
He was like, उसे दे दो नहीं तो मैं चुरा के I'll distribute it amongst villagers. And then so like the master refused, and then you like fast forwarded, and there was this musical performance where they're dancing. And I mean, like, the things you were saying, I was catching bits of it, not 100%, but so they were dancing, and in the, like, using that, the Charandas and the servant, they were stealing the bags of grain, and yeah,
Absolutely.
basically kind of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Absolutely. So they basically busy the zamindar in the music कि वो अपना हारमोनियम वगैरह सब मंगवा लेता है कि चलो टोली आइए टोली के साथ बजाते हैं. And वो पीछे से they kind of just steal the grains away. And then the next scene is where he's distributing the grains to the people in the village. So how I'm differentiating this from what I mentioned earlier as, the nationalist paradigm of theater is that here you are basically foregrounding the identity of the people. So the idea of the people is the most important here. कि छत्तीसगढ़ी लैंग्वेज में है, उनके फॉर्म्स के थ्रू आप all the points that you want to bring through, you will bring through their theatrical forms, their musical forms. And in that there is also the creation of there is also an imagination of a new world. And this imagination of a new world, a world of equality, or a world of whatever the playwright and the director want to envision. But here that is being done. So that is the end here. So all this music and everything is being used towards this end here. But in current, or say in the nationalist paradigm, the whole idea is to maybe somewhere use the music to show how to represent India in its kind of in its unity, and to convey certain values which should be part of our lives post independence. So it is somewhere trying to give us some value to our nationhood through those plays. And one second, let me just go back to this. So while, like I was saying, that while in Karanth, the idea is to bring everything to the national stage, in Habib Tanveer, the idea is to remain marginal and off center, and from there pose a critique of cultural homogeneity. And so he's also working with a regional resource. Karanth is also working with a regional resource. But here the music of Chhattisgarh is presented in its individuality. And all the actors that he has on stage, they are all from Chhattisgarh, they're all regional actors. And they're all musicians also. So you see that, so naturally they shift from acting to singing in the course of the play. And so this is something that the name of his theater was Naya Theater. So he really kind of, he really worked towards creating this kind of an indigenous theatrical form, which poses question to the dominant order. So that was his idea, and he's using the vocabulary of Chhattisgarh to kind of bring those questions out. Now, very interestingly, this is also the time in the in the 70s and 80s when there is something which is happening on the international stage, which is festivals of India. So during matlab Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi ke time par, there are these festivals of India which are being organized all over the world, and certain performances from India are going to represent the nation there. Usme you have folk performances that are going, which represent certain identities of India, and they are going there on the international stage. So uske andar there is a very interesting performer who is Tijan Bai. Now Tijan Bai is also from Chhattisgarh. Have any of you heard Tijan Bai or heard of her? No? Okay, so this is something that you must kind of go back to and look at, because she's a very, very powerful performer of this form, which is called Pandavani. Pandavani meaning Pandavon ki Vani. So these are basically episodes from the Mahabharata, which are narrated in the Chhattisgarhi language. And so I'll maybe just show you first. Just a second.
एवं कापालिक शैली.
Hey, it's not shared.
And I'm just. So this is from a documentary, so please don't mind the very random kind of a voiceover over this.
पात्रों में मानव और मानव में नायकत्व की खोज आज तक जारी है. कथा महाभारत ने भी अपने कदमों के निशान यहाँ वहाँ छोड़े हैं. पंडवानी महाभारत का एक जनजातीय आख्यान है. पंडवानी अर्थात पांडवों की वाणी का एक महत्वपूर्ण स्थान है. अन्य लोक रूपों की तुलना में ये सबसे नया प्रदर्शनकारी कला रूप है. इनके इस आख्यान का नायक अर्जुन नहीं, भीम है.
युद्धान के बात ले सुनी जरासन हाथ जोड़ के कहे, ये तीनों मूर्ति में नर नारायण, ये कौन यो बस मुलाय असल रूप दिखा दे. भगवान कृष्ण जी अपन रूप में आ गए, अर्जुन अपन गांडी धनुष लेके आ गए, गदाधारी भीमसेन हाथ में गदा लेके आ गए. तो जरासन कहे, हे कन्हैया, तोर संग भाग जाने वाले प्राणी के साथ मैं दोबारा लड़ाई नहीं करूं यार. हाँ, थोड़ा से गदाधारी भीमसेन है. भीम के बात सुनी नहीं कके, तो भीम उठा हाथ में गदा, गरज के भीमसेन ले ले. जरासन पकड़ के गदा भीमा से ना बोले भाई. जरासन भीमा मारे दोनों लड़ा खड़े.
एक मान्यता के अनुसार।
So this is Tijan Bai, and as you can see, it's a very, very powerful, kind of a performance where she is enacting these episodes from the Mahabharata, but in the process, she's also kind of retelling the story, and she's telling she's retelling it in her own way, and so she plays different parts, and she becomes different characters in the process. She acts, according to the mood of whatever she's presenting, and so this is Tijan Bai, and she travels across the world during the 70s and 80s, participating in these festivals of India. So somewhere, you see ki both of these people are coming from Chhattisgarh. On one hand, you have Tijan Bai. On the other hand, you have Habib Tanvir. एक फोक फॉर्म की एक मास्टर म्यूजिशियन है वो, एंड वो पूरे इंडिया को एक तरह के मतलब वो पूरे इंडिया का एक कल्चरल ग्लोरी जो है उसको वो विदेश लेके जा रही हैं, और इस टाइम पे इससे एक सेलिब्रिटी हुड भी क्रिएट हो रहा है, एंड तो Tijan Bai goes to France, and it is also because of her movement that later on she's also awarded the Padma Shri, and all those state awards and all are given to her. Even though the community that she comes from is absolutely marginalized, she comes from a denotified tribe called the Parthi community, and so she also happens to be the first woman performer of Pandavani. And interestingly, when Habib Tanvir is working in Raipur with Naya Theatre, and he's also very well known, लेकिन उनका पूरा आइडिया है कि वो छत्तीसगढ़ में रहकर टेकिंग द सेम मटेरियल, स्टेट और नेशन सेलिब्रेशन का जो ये पूरा पैराडाइम है इसको वो क्रिटिक कर रहे हैं, ही स्टैंडिंग अगेंस्ट इट. So there is a people's point of view rather than a state's point of view, but the material is the same form, same kind of use of music, same kind of a theatrical kind of form, and so here Tijan Bai, as an exponent of a folk form, she is highlighting some very very interesting binaries. So this is not to say, this is not to present Habib Tanvir as this radical figure and Tijan Bai is as someone who's appropriated by this whole nationalist paradigm. That is not my idea. But the idea is to present folk in these two forms. Like I said, folk as an identity, folk as a regional identity. तो आप जब आप बोलोगे छत्तीसगढ़ी folk, तो आप Tijan Bai का नाम लोगे, क्योंकि आप Tijan Bai को एसोसिएट कर रहे हो एक छत्तीसगढ़ी आइडेंटिटी से. एंड दूसरी तरफ there is an idea of people which is represented by, which is very consciously kind of manipulated and used by Habib Tanvir in Naya Theatre. So, but when you say, when you look at the performance of Pandavani itself, there is a certain, there is a vitality to the form. There is a certain liveness to the form in the way that she, builds the narrative, and the way, and just see the use of her tambura. The tambura becomes भीम की गदा भी वो बन जाता है, कहीं तलवार बन जाता है, कहीं रथ बन जाता है. I'll show you another clip. So she has performed extensively with Spit McKay, and she used to come to JNU very often, where I studied, and I've seen a lot of her performances where there are people who are sitting right up to the very stage where she stands. मतलब स्टेज भी नहीं है वो, ऐसे JNU में एक बैडमिंटन कोर्ट है जिसके ऊपर इवेंट्स होते हैं, तो वो बैडमिंटन कोर्ट के एक कोने पे Tijan Bai is standing, and जो इतने लोग भरे हुए, इतने स्टूडेंट्स हैं वहां पे, और वो कहे जा रही हैं कि कि आ जाओ, आगे बैठ जाओ, आगे बैठ जाओ, आगे आ जाओ. तो people are almost sitting to the very front where she is standing, and she barely has enough space to stand, but she manages to perform because her whole performance is somewhere vertically aligned. She doesn't need to move around, and she doesn't have those demands of proscenium stage where there is an idea of audience and performer as two separate entities. Audience का अपना एक discipline है, actors का अपना एक discipline है, उधर एक टेक्स्ट है जो पूरा परफॉर्म होगा, उसके अंदर कुछ चेंज नहीं होगा, एंड इधर एक ऑडियंस है जो उस पूरे टेक्स्ट को ऑब्जॉर्व करेगी, उससे कुछ सीख के घर जाएगी. बट in Pandavani, and at least in the performances that you see of any folk form, you see that the performer is both the performer as well as a part of the people. So there is an idea of a new community is being imagined, a new idea of a world is being imagined where the idea of people is foregrounded. So I'll just show you this this is a really a very recent performance of hers in JNU. शायद 2018 का है ये. और मैं इसमें बस आपको मतलब इन टर्म्स ऑफ कंटेंट के लिए नहीं दिखा रही, बस दिखा रही हूँ कि एक परफॉर्मेंस का जो फील है कि हाउ शी स्टार्ट्स द परफॉर्मेंस, हाउ शी गेट्स पीपल इन इट. तो एट सम पॉइंट हियर शी सेज कि तो चलते हैं कुरुक्षेत्र, और हम अकेले नहीं जाएंगे, आपको भी साथ में लेके जाएंगे. एंड तो इसके अंदर एक मतलब जैसे वो एरिस्टोटल की थ्योरी में है ना कि एवरी प्ले नीड्स टू हैव अ बिगिनिंग, मिडिल एंड एंड. Here the story just starts somewhere, and there are no these concrete kind of boundaries to it. Not to say that the performance is not structured. Of course she has a structure in mind, but it is not it stands against these formal conventions of proscenium theater that we see in other plays. Even in Habib Tanveer you see कि वो proscenium के अंदर छत्तीसगढ़ी folk को लेके आ रहा है, लेकिन यहाँ पे you see कि वो जो distinction है between the audience and the performer, even though she is also standing on a stage here, is completely kind of merged. So I'll just play this for the first few minutes.
बड़ों को हम प्रणाम करते हैं, छोटों को आशीर्वाद. हम बच्चों के बीच में आने के बाद ऐसे लगता है कि कोई कमल के फूल में भंवरा गुनगुना रहे हैं. इसलिए हम इस पैके में बहुत दिन से हम जुड़े हुए हैं. अब तो हमारी उम्र बुढ़ापा आ गई, हम 72 साल के हैं. नहीं 72, हम 74 साल के हैं. सॉरी 74 साल में कान भी गया, आग भी गई, सारी चीज चली गई, पर भी जनता आप लोगों के प्यार में बनकर हम चले आते हैं. चलो जीते समय हम आपको सुना सकते उतने सुनाएंगे, नहीं सुनाएंगे तो हम क्षमा मांग लेंगे. तो चले कहाँ, कुरुक्षेत्र की तरफ. लड़ाई तो कहो या पांडव की है, ज्यादा दूर तो नहीं. तो कर्ण अर्जुन के संवाद, दुशासन वध, ये कथा हम सुना रहे हैं. यदि किसी को दूसरा कथा में रुचि हो तो हमें बता दे, हम वहीं से शुरू कर लें. तो फिर चले कुरुक्षेत्र की तरफ. हम अकेले नहीं चलेंगे, सबको लेके चलेंगे.
बिहारी लाल की
तो यहाँ से कथा शुरू हो जाती है, लेकिन इसके पहले मतलब इवन द जेस्चर ऑफ हर काइंड ऑफ द वे शी ब्रिंग्स द तंबूरा ना, मतलब वो घुमा के जैसे लेके आती, समवेयर दैट सिग्नल्स, मतलब एक तरीके से जैसे रथ चला के जैसे आप रुकते हो एंड देन शी इज काइंड ऑफ नरेटिंग द स्टोरी. So these are like very little things, and in her use of the tambura as a prop, in her use of her certain emotions that she highlights, yeah, fir the way the musicians who are sitting behind her, the way they question and they respond to the whole story. So it, instead of being a katha which is being narrated, it becomes uh, a story which is being told at that very moment, in that here and now. And in that retelling also you will see that she brings a lot of familiar elements, जैसे मतलब द वे कृष्ण को जैसे एड्रेस कर रहे होंगे, या फिर किसी को मामा बोल रहे हैं, और या फिर यार बोल रहे हैं, मतलब वो टर्मिनोलॉजी भी उसकी एक बहुत कैजुअल टर्मिनोलॉजी है, जिसके थ्रू शी इज एबल टू, मतलब शी इज नॉट अ कैरियर ऑफ द महाभारत, मतलब शी इज क्रिएटिंग इट इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ टेलिंग इट. And here you see this liveness and this vitality that I was talking about. इसलिए इन सब forms को living traditions कहा जाता है कि they have a very a dynamic kind of a feel to them. And in this dynamism, where the audience and the performer, everyone is part of the same world. It's not as if there's no sermon on the mount happening over here. कि एक ऊपर से आपको बताएगा कि क्या करना चाहिए, and that's how you follow the whole thing. Here there is an imagination of a new kind of there is a vision of a new world, a new imagination through a coming together of people. And this is what, and I'll kind of end with this point, Suvani. I hope I haven't overshot the time too much.
No, not at all. You can continue in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with this, I will come to the question that I was trying to pose at the very beginning. कि एक तरफ तो music is being used in theater, and on the other hand, now how do we understand music? Music का अपना एक essence क्या है? तो is it always and at that moment I pose the question which I have put in my title, that is music capable of politics? Now you will say कि यहाँ क्या politics हो रहा है, what is politics? So we also need to now radically redefine what we mean by politics. By politics, here I do not mean say state का politics, nation का इस type का politics, या फिर एक political party का politics. That's not what I mean by politics over here. But politics is the creation of a problem in a particular situation, through which you are pushed to think. So that is an idea of politics. कि जैसे तीजन भाई की परफॉर्मेंस को आप उसके थ्रू आप कैसे एक आइडिया को सोच सकते हो, आप कैसे एक imagination of the world को देख सकते हो, a world which is Tijan Bai's world, a world that she is creating. So what are the ethos of that world, or what are the principles that world follows? So these are different ideas that exist in the very essence of music. So the whole idea is that while in theater there is like a use of music to convey a particular point, then what is the self, what is the music itself? And the point that we are somewhere here trying to make is that music has its own politics. So even when we talk about music in particular, हम जैसे बोलते हैं कि हम म्यूजिक को भी बहुत तरह से कैटेगराइज करते हैं कि there is political music, there is devotional music, जो उसका कंटेंट है वो डिटरमिन करता है. तो जैसे अगर एक भजन होगा तो हम उसको डिवोशनल कहेंगे क्योंकि वो एक डेटी को प्रेज करते हुए बोल रहा है. और अगर एक जैसे फैज अहमद फैज की कोई नज्म हो गई जहाँ पे वो जो एक स्टेटस को है उसको क्वेश्चन कर रहे हैं, तो उसको हम पॉलिटिकल थिएटर बोलेंगे, सॉरी पॉलिटिकल म्यूजिक बोलेंगे. तो लेकिन it's not the thematic that that governs whether the music is political or not. It is the music itself. Here, what is the thematic that Tijan Bai is performing? She is performing a very simple, mundane story from the Mahabharata. But it is in the very music that a politics is embedded, where there is also the risk कि ये politics मतलब लोगों को लगेगा अरे ये तो इतनी powerful performance है, इसको बेचना चाहिए, तो इसको मतलब then you bring it into a very commercial circuit where Tijan Bai becomes the folk identity of Chhattisgarh. So that is also, there is the risk of appropriation with everything. But in the very essence, what is the music trying to do? And from here, I will, taking this idea of politics, I will end with an example, which is something that I have dealt with in my research, which is around the work of Kumar Gandharv. Kumar Gandharv is considered to be a very, some people call him the question mark in front of Indian classical music. कि वो मतलब हिंदुस्तानी शास्त्रीय संगीत के सामने खड़ा हुआ एक प्रश्न चिन्ह है. ये एक म्यूजिशियन थे गोविंदराव टेम्बे, उन्होंने उनके बारे में बोला था. एंड ये क्यों? क्योंकि द काइंड ऑफ स्टाइल दैट कुमार गंधर्व formulates, मतलब in within Indian classical. Have any of you heard Kumar Gandharv's music? Okay, so this is also on your listening list. So the kind of music that Kumar Gandharv is creating pushes him, matlab, in terms of an analysis, towards the threshold of Indian classical music. कि कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि अरे ये classical है या नहीं है, और and he also incorporates a lot of elements from the region of Malwa. So he lived in Malwa for for a large chunk of his life, and वहाँ पे मालवा के अंदर एक कबीर ट्रेडिशन बहुत, वहाँ पे नाथपंथी और ये सब लोग, मतलब wandering minstrels, they kind of they sing these bhajans of Kabir. So listening to them, he kind of he brings a quotation of that in his music, and so he somewhere says that my music, that he says that the Indian classical music, that Rag Sangeet basically is derived from folk. This is the point that he is making. And he says that, so his authority then becomes not any gharana, it becomes folk directly. That, what I am singing is something which is derived directly from folk. And he says that मैं किसी घराने को belong नहीं करता. Okay, and this statement becomes such a controversy that till date Kumar Gandharv is seen as a controversial figure, in the sense that मतलब कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि नहीं नहीं नहीं, ये तो ग्वालियर घराने से है, इनकी ट्रेनिंग इस टीचर के अंडर हुई, तो that means that by consequence he belongs to a certain style of singing. कुछ लोग बोलते हैं कि नहीं नहीं नहीं, in his music he takes elements from this musician, from that musician. So if this musician comes from Kirana Gharana, so then Kumar Gandharv is Gwalior and Kirana both. So then another person comes and says that कि नहीं, इसके अंदर तो the structure is very embedded in tal, so maybe he is also drawing from Jaipur Gharana. So there is, so the whole idea is always to constantly try to bring Kumar Gandharv back into the Gharana framework, to somewhere deduce his style, to say कि अच्छा ये यहाँ belong करता है. और ये जो मैं जिस point से मैंने शुरू किया था कि जो पूरा इंडियन थिएटर का जो आइडिया है, इंडियन म्यूजिक का जो आइडिया है, इंडियन डांस फॉर्म्स का जो आइडिया है पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस, उसके अंदर ये कैटेगरी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाती है कि व्हाट इज क्लासिकल, व्हाट इज फोक. एंड क्लासिकल मीन्स समथिंग व्हिच इज appreciated by the elite and by a very niche audience, and folk becomes something which is representing a community ka identity, or a basically which is run by an identitarian logic. So that becomes folk. But in the very essence of it, what is the music? So that becomes our task as musicians, as scholars, to see कि वो music अपने आप में क्या कह रहा है. So when Kumar Gandharv says that I don't belong to any gharana, what is he doing? He is somewhere upturning the whole system of Indian classical music. जो उसका पूरा एक घराना system है, उसको वो he rejects that system, but while being within Indian classical music. So this is something that I would say is an idea of politics. Because for me, politics here is not, this ideology or that ideology, but by saying that I don't belong to any gharana and I sing what I feel like singing. And Kumar Gandhar opens an idea of freedom in Hindustani music. So the fact that through his music, you can think about an idea of freedom is a question of politics. Just like in the performance of Tijan Bai, through the music that she's performing, you can think about an idea of life. You can think about an idea of continuity, an idea of equality, an idea of freedom. So, so this is basically the point that I was, trying to make through this rather bizarre schema that I drew. And I don't know, I hope it made sense. And if there are any questions, please do ask. Or any comments, anything you would like to say.
Thanks, Anubhuti. Thanks so much. Very, very compelling set of points.
Maybe at the end, I'll also play a small clip of Kumar Gandhar.
Sure, yeah. You guys feel free to just put across anything that's on your mind, actually. Meanwhile, maybe I'll just sort of, ask you or like, just maybe just fill in the time while the others think of questions. But initially this, one of the tendencies that you spoke about was this kind of a bypassing of the colonial past, and almost like trying to create a space that ignores the fact that is also integrated into where we're at now, right? So something like Tijan Bai becomes interesting in that, no? Because then it's she's swinging between the two poles, right? Where she can very much be on this side because of the fact that she's Tijan Bai, Chhattisgarh, a certain kind of folk narrative, Pandavani, so a certain kind of national identity, an authentic past, an authentic narrative. And then what she's trying to do within it, which is this kind of creation of a new world order. So where does she, like, where would you say she lies? Because she's also a part of the festivals of India, like you said, right? And the international circuits. So is it both? Is she occupying like both the spaces? Like, is it a continuum then? Where there is that appropriation that's also happening of her, but then within the appropriation also one can kind of,
So, it's what you're saying is absolutely right. That, she is somewhere as much of the past as she is of the present. But the question is not of either or, that, whether she is on this side or that side, which is why I said at the beginning that to pose her vis-a-vis Habib Tanveer, the idea is not to say that Habib Tanveer is radical or, and Tijan Bai is appropriated as a folk musician. But the performance of Pandavani that she's presenting is modern. It's coming up. Yes, she's telling the story of the Mahabharat, but she's telling it in the 20th century, and she's retelling it from the structures of society. So she, like I said, she brings in a lot of familiar elements from our society and from our everyday life, and those are of her social concrete reality, which is of this time. And then the story just becomes a framework in which she kind of brings these ideas through that story. And somewhere Bhim, Dushasan, Draupadi, Arjun, all of them become, characters in the very village. Or say two people who are fighting, and she's kind of depicting that story to you. So if we have to say that, how do we categorize Tijan Bai? The idea would be to think about Tijanbai beyond categorizations.
Yeah.
That what is it that her performance is trying to highlight, and from that taking the taking up the point that how do we read every performance then?
The
So-
contradictions then become what you, I mean, it is the contradictions that are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then and from that lens, if you start looking at other performances,
Yeah.
say Biraha, or you look at Kathakali, which are all embedded in such, what do you say, religious, and the stories that they are talking, like in Kathakali, the story that you're talking about is of all the ancient Sanskrit texts, and of Ramayana, of Nala Charitam, presented in that dance drama. But within that, in the way the dance functions, in the way the performers perform that role, there is always a going out and in. So there is matlab the performance is always on a threshold.
Right.
It can at any moment, it can collapse the categorization that we are putting it in.
Right.
So I think that looking at performances from this perspective then also gives you the lens to then look at about the nature of performance in itself.
Yeah. And I think it's also like what you sort of foregrounded, the distinction between the audience and the performer collapses. In a similar way, in both of your examples, the distinction between the musician and the performer is also collapsing. As in the actor and the performer and the musician. No? So I think that's also a way to kind of think of like music aesthetically, structurally within the performance art tradition, and how that this collapse is happening at like different fronts in a way almost. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Any other comments? Or
I just want to say that really sorry, Mike. So I just want to say that this was all this information was really new to me, like be able to categorize, and then the way you delivered, like told us the dilemma of like categorizing people. It was like very new for me, and categorizing people into these kind of. And I just want to add one comment, like I've heard about theater, but this is actually like first time I'm actually like interactively seeing theater with a group of people, and I just feel like this is a very, very strong method of depicting something, because I guess this is like goes way beyond ages, because when there were no recording and nothing, like this is how people like actually delivered something. And it's good to know like that people like Tijanbai, and they are like still, even in this particular digital age, they're still going through it and like performing it, which makes them like very, very special, because this is something I would say like getting endangered in with like ages, and probably it's gonna get lost. So it was really nice to know about all these things.
Thank you so much, Akash. But it won't get endangered. I think in every region people find a way to entertain themselves and create new kinds of texts, new kinds of performances. So I was just talking to another friend, and he was saying ki abhi with the lockdown, all these like in the villages, what happens is ki with seasons, जो भी मेला लगता है उसके साथ साथ ऐसे 3-3, 4-4 दिन के लिए जैसे नौटंकी की परफॉर्मेंस होगी, या अगर दशहरा के बाद, या फिर वो जो दिवाली से पहले जो वो टाइम होता है, उसमें ऐसे 9 दिन का एक फेस्टिवल होगा जिसके अंदर रामायण विल बी परफॉर्म्ड एवरी डे, and that is kind of gone on to a decline with COVID, with so many restrictions, with like a shortage of funds, and I had thought somewhere that कि अब तो खत्म हो रहा होगा, sort of a thing. But this friend of mine was telling me that in his village now, they do a 3-day performance, which is an all-night performance. And Tijan Bhai also, I'll maybe just share this. I really like this article on her. This is from 1989. That she also used to go for these performances, which were all-nighters, and because of which, being a woman, how it also impacted her personal life. And but yeah, the point that I was making was that newer performances and newer ways of imagining different kinds of spaces comes up in villages. When in the face of any restriction, you find that the form evolves and something new gets created. But yeah, this is the article. And Suvani, have you shared this is the Charandas Chor full play?
Yeah, I've shared the Charandas Chor and the 48-minute link and the Pandavani. Yeah.
Acha, theek hai.
The Pandavani was what year? Sorry, the Charandas Chor was what year?
I think this was 1970s sometime.
Okay. Right.
Should I put the link of the performances that I showed?
Which ones? I mean, I've.
So this is of the JNU performance.
Right, yeah. Also, like in the contemporary, like with the contemporary sort of thing that we are in, right? Like there is obviously a kind of like very much a continuing of the tendency of wanting to kind of bypass the colonial past or like circumvent it, and this sort of the decolonization paradigm also very much then gets absorbed into things. But like could you also give some examples of like some more contemporary acts which have either like say which are continuing the legacy of say Habib Tanveer in terms of how a new world order is being imagined within theater, within music, and like someone like Tejan Bhai is very unique in that respect and very much still contemporary. But any other things that we can kind of look at? Any other,
So after Habib Tanveer, the Naya Theatre has been performing still,
right.
And so they have new members, but yeah, the the feel of that old performance is not there anymore, and like people are going in search of more opportunities, and you don't find actors, and wo sab ho raha hai with Naya Theatre also. And but these plays are still performed by say other theatre companies. And it's been a long time actually since I went and saw a play in a theater, but I remember ये जो Meta and NSD का जो festival Bharangam जो होता है उसके अंदर you see a lot of these new groups that are performing not just stories from not just plays from India, but everything from Ibsen, Shakespeare to a very good production that I saw was Rajat Kapoor's theatre group performing a comic version of Hamlet. So
yeah, I've seen that too. The Clown Prince.
Hamlet, the Clown Prince. So वो है, लेकिन मतलब but ये उसके अंदर एक वो है कि मतलब there is now a very diverse range of things that you can do in theatre. मतलब
right.
What I have shown you is from the previous century, where stage lighting se leke in terms of projection and everything has really kind of boomed. And so maybe I might not be able to think of particular examples right now, but you should look at the work of all these Amal Alana, Neelam Singh, and so these are things that are coming to my mind. But in terms of regional performances, Tijan Bhai has also trained a lot of students. There are if you just search Pandavani on YouTube, you will find many other performers also. And a very good resource for all of you would be Sahapedia, because they have been doing the work of documenting and researching on these performances. So you see, just I didn't talk much about the content of what Tijan Bai is talking about. So she comes, like I said, from Pardi community, which is a denotified tribe. And ये जो पूरा tradition है of Mahabharat stories being narrated, it was done by communities which were at the very margins of society. So you had Gondi people who were performing these stories. You had Pardi people performing these stories. And this article that I've shared, this India Today article from 1989, it will show you that distinction between Tijan Bai as a performer and Tijan Bai as part of society.
Right.
Because despite whatever it is that she's achieved as an artist, her her everyday existence remains at the very margins, where she is working at the Bhilai steel plant and earning daily wages. So but in the content of the story also, you see that and this you will find on Sahapedia, that in the content also of Mahabharat, which Mahabharat is this? When you talk about folk traditions, this is not the Mahabharat, the book. It is an oral tradition which has been passed down from generation to generation. And so there are stories which also critique the dominant Mahabharat that we talk about. So there is a story of a Gond Raja, and there is the story of other marginal characters. And in her performance, Tijan Bai, how she deals with that character, so what she makes of that character, becomes very important. And so this is something that all of these performances really contribute to the corpus of texts of performance. Like you see in the case of Ramayana also, you see this. All the oral traditions that perform the Ramayana, they give you so many other versions of the Ramayana, which was circulating as a spoken text, which was, and not just in India, in all of South Asia. So Paula Richmond is a scholar who's done extensive work on the Ramayana. And A.K. Ramanujan has an essay called 300 Ramayanas, which was also recently banned because in the current political order, we are seeing the Tulsi Ramayana as the dominant Ramayana among all the other traditions. But where is it that you find these other traditions of Ramayana? You find them in the folk traditions, where these stories are being told. And not just in the way the story, or not just in, so I'm saying that that the I'm not saying that it's radical that they are, that that if you're telling the story of a marginal character, that makes the performance radical. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that the performance in itself, for example, in Kathakali or in Kudiyattam, if you see how the demon characters are represented, the scale at which the demon characters are represented, like, they're a personal favorite for me, that because the range you have when you are acting as a demon, or as Putna, and how you're able to bring out the plight of Putna in that story, because now you're not just presenting a story, you are in that story as that character. So how does Putna bring out the plight of being punished? And so that is something that you see in the performance of a very traditional story from a Puran. And just in the way an actor kind of presents a particular character, that you start seeing that character, that you start seeing the whole story from the perspective of that character. So that is something very important. So in the stories around Draupadi is asking questions. She is saying that, why is it that this was done to me? And she's demanding answers from whoever is, the patriarchal authority in that story. And similarly in the Ramayana, Sita is questioning why she has to go through the Agni Pariksha and all of that. So all of these things are coming inside, are coming through these performances also. So which is why I think to engage with the like what I call the vitality and the liveness of this idea of the people, it is important to maybe also look at these performances and search on your own and watch them and discuss them amongst each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions or comments from any of you? No? Okay. But yeah, you've definitely, I think, left us with a lot to think about. And I think some of these points that you're bringing to the fore are points that, they all of you, like, even when you're thinking about your projects, do keep these in mind, especially what, Anubhuti brings to the foreground about the idea of this imagination of a new world, or like the challenge to the dominant order that, say, music is throwing up, or the way a certain kind of theatrical work presents. So all of these, I think all of these ideas are very, very generative, they're very compelling, and they can just sort of, you can sit with them, think through them, and think through some of the references that she shared, and, in a way slightly widen and deepen this understanding of how music can be a kind of agent of, imagination of this sort of new world order, how various performance traditions can be that, and how maybe you can even think of, like, if any of you have had a background in theater, I'm not sure, none of you really sort of responded to that, but it's something to explore, I guess, even if one hasn't had background or experience. It's definitely piqued a lot of interest for me, and so yeah, a big thank you. And yeah.
Hi, sorry if I'm extending.
No, not at all.
Padmanabhan, I just have one question. You had mentioned about the future, about the history being a part of the performance coming in, or we are integrating history in the performances, and with the coming of new spaces to explore different performative arts. How do you see the history in that, and how also, like you were saying, that line between the performer and the audience is also being merged or blurred? How do you see, if with digital performances and all that, these lines being thinning down or something like that? Yeah,
I was just hoping no one asks me this question because these lines have only grown stronger and not just between audience and performers, but between audience and audience also. So that whole feel of sitting in a theater and watching something together is also not there. So yeah, so online, as in, I am not like, yes, digital is good, but I think it also has its problems and shortcomings. So I saw that a lot of theater groups were performing online. They were they using the Zoom features, they managed to do that. And I was also teaching in a school, and my God, they made me do an annual day online, which was like a play where people were wearing students were wearing filters and doing different characters. So I know the immense torture that it was for me, and what it did to theater. It was a murder for as in I'm not saying this for other productions, but the ones that I was overseeing, they turned out to be a complete there was no, it was just about how you're looking in this little box, and whatever line you're delivering, there's no space because you speak and someone else gets cut. So there is so much that you need to take care of. And I was working with primary school children, so it was even more difficult. And then comes the role of editing. So like I also we was our school was supposed to. I'm sorry if I hope I'm still relating to your question of online performances and not going into my own stories. So my school was supposed to participate in this in something which is called Vasant Valley School Drama Festival, and so 10 students are supposed to make a play online. And obviously that doesn't mean that they come on, they come into this space, everyone has their dialogues rehearsed, nothing like that, but everyone records their videos and sends me, and I edit it all together. So theater also, now the line between theater and film gets very kind of blurred and almost overlapping with each other, because everything is produced in a complete kind of a sense when it comes to the digital space. So that was that much for that. And what you said about history, sorry, can you please repeat the question about history?
Oh yeah, so you mentioned that history is also being told with the recent events, mixed around, like whatever the mythological stories are being retold, they're also mixed with current happenings and and whatnot. So how do you see with the digital performances and all that, this history merging in? How do you see that coming in? And
it's a very interesting question, actually, because when I was searching for Tijenbai's performances, I saw that she also performed online for the recent Spikmaki convention, which was happening online. And I didn't even click on that link, but yeah, that remains a curiosity. How would she have done that in this space? But I think that somewhere depends on the format of the performance and on the perspective of the performer, that what you want to bring into that performance. So if it is if it is a performance that is like in Pandavani, you see that it is a constant dialogue between the musicians who sit at the back and you. So and sometimes you also incorporate elements which are happening in front of you, ki matlab audience mein kuch ho raha hai to aap usko bhi story ke andar you kind of bring it in. So I think that remains with the performer. It's not as if it goes away, or that it is endangered now that we are in the digital space. So that remains a choice of the performer on how they want to bring it in.
Thanks.
Thank you. So all the students in this course, they're all musicians, and or what are they studying?
Yeah, they're studying like a mix of performance, production, and production. So like there's a mix of instrumentalists, there's a mix of digital music production students. But Manabhan is not at GMI. He's come in to listen in to you.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, otherwise, Megha, do you have something to say?
No, I'm just listening. I'm so glad that we could do this, because it's actually the first time that we have actually done a session. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but I'm so glad we finally got to do this. Unfortunate that we couldn't do it at the campus, but nonetheless, glad that it happened in any case. Because I always feel that all the forms of creative art have they're not distinct or separate from each other. They have these common areas where they do intersect, and that's where this whole course of music and art studies for us comes in, wherein we are trying to see music intersecting with other forms of art and how they have like a cause and effect relationship, like how, and somewhere those line gets blurred as to who is affecting whom, kind of a thing. And it's been wonderful to hear from you also, talking from more of the styles which are more in the interiors of the country and how they have been using that. Maybe somewhere down the line when we do the next session, we can bring in more contemporary forms of now theater that you were saying that, of course, it's so depth, so vast that one obviously cannot touch upon everything in one go. But yeah, that's also an equally an interesting section that one can explore to see how that is coming in, and wherein maybe in today's day and age when digital is seeming like one of the mainstay, hoping that it's not the only stay, but one of the areas how we engage and interact with each other, how that's getting used, and even using installations and getting that going with all the modern equipments and everything. So that's another form of interaction that's happening, and also with that and the intersection of produced music. So usually we would think of theater with live music happening, but now it's also going to more electronic music with a kind of a contemporary form of theater going around. So that's another ball game altogether, which will be completely different from what we maybe shared and discussed today. So yeah, I mean, very, very interested to look forward to how we can also talk about those things in future.
Absolutely. Thanks actually for saying all that, because I was wondering that in order to highlight this, this idea of, music and theater, I thought to go at the very root of it and see how it all started.
It's
But I was
always
also, but I was also thinking that, if considering all the students here are working on production and on, digital production as well. So then I would like to reframe my answer to Padmanabhan some time back. I think there are two ways in which we look at the use of technology in theater. One is to say कि वो सब पुराना pristine glory has gone and now everything is technological. So, it is a decline. That is the way in which we see it. But like what I was saying was in the context of this online, this Zoom kind of a space. But when it comes to technology has always been the advent of possibilities.
Yeah.
So your possibilities are maximized as soon as you have different media in your, at your disposal.
Correct.
So even in productions that you see these days, like if you should definitely go to the NSD Theatre Festival, where different kinds of productions and how they are using. In some of them, you will see that there is an overflowing of technology, such that your play becomes a spectacle. It just becomes this, this projection, that music, and this and that. But on the other hand, there is also a very a conscious use of technology. So, and this is something that, Brecht also kind of talks about, that technology should never let you forget the unattainable. So the unattainable being this imagination of another world, this imagination of a world which is an equal world, which is a world that has freedom, equality, these values. So when technology kind of came in, it was seen as something which is going to be a revolution, and that's the thing with any kind of a possibility, that it can go anywhere. And so I think as people who are working with the digital medium, the best thing for you, all of you, would be to orient things through your own understanding, and bring your own quotation into that technology, rather being governed by the technology. Be governed, but not too much.
Like, it's not just about the use of technology, because at the end of the day, it's a tool, and rather than, like, because a lot of it is about the question of access also. So then a certain kind of a space that is quote unquote using technology might only have certain access points. So then how do you kind of turn that around as well, turn that around to apply it, for sure, but like you're saying, apply it in a way that is maybe more critical or conscientious.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, two people come to mind: Amitesh Grover and Zulekha Chaudhary, both contemporary theatre practitioners, but who are very much trying to also, like, test this kind of threshold of experimental theatre with technology and the design of experience. So it could be interesting for you guys to also look at the work of Amitesh Grover and Zulekha Chaudhary. I'll put it in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And GMI students, you can check with João and Andrea. João right now is, in fact, in summer is going to be in Holland writing for theater production, and he is going to be writing music for the whole production, which is going to be produced, doing the show live. And Andrea is already part of an opera performance that's happening, and she's going to, and she plays, so they have a music. So for Anubhuti and Padmanabhan, who are not part of GMI, João is our He's a faculty at GMI whose primary instrument is piano. He's from Brazil. And Andrea is another faculty whose primary instrument is bass, and she's from Austria. So both of them, although they are performers, but they're also engaged in these production, in writing and performing the music as part of the whole theatrical production, which is live. So it will be interesting for you both, for you all who are interested. Maybe just check in with them how their experience is all about and how they go about doing that, because it's very much in line of what we're talking about, how that intersects. And of course, not from the digital point of view, but more, but then of course, looking, I'm not sure what their scale of production is of the things that they're involved in, but there might be a lot of live elements as well as some, produced elements coming in together there. So yeah, go for it and explore with them what they are doing.
Amazing. Yeah. Cool. So I think on that note, we can, thank you, Anubhuti. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all for such a nice and lively discussion.
Yes, it was a rainy morning. It's one of those days where it's been like mentally raining. But yes, I'm so glad we could do this. And thank you so much, Anubhuti.
Thank you.
Everyone
Thank you
who
so
joined
much.
us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
I
everyone.
hope to
Thank
have
you.
you at the campus whenever we do this next.
Absolutely.
And congratulations and good luck on your new the school. We'll talk about that separately. Very interesting to see you, Subbu, everybody doing things together. That's nice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for today. It was really good.
Likewise.
Maybe we'll meet again for a sequel of this.
Yes, shall, for sure. Okay, everybody, have a lovely Saturday. See you guys around.